Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum is on the air.
Good evening. This is Dr. Dan, and this is Freedom Forum Live, streamed every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Tonight, there is a persistent myth in American civic life that money is separate from land, taxation, and federal power. History shows the very opposite is true. The story of sound money in the United States is not just about coins and currency. It is the story of who controls land, who bears the tax burden, and how far federal authority can reach into local life and therefore into your life. 1913 was a very bad year in the continual hostile battle of individual freedom set against the power of big government. The 17th Amendment, direct election of senators, significantly reduced the power of state governments as individual units in the federal system. The 16th Amendment allowed the federal government to tax personal income directly, something our founders absolutely did not want to happen. The establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank shifted financial power from individual banks and gold-based system toward a central authority that manages the economy with more government influence over money. Credit, interest rates, and liquidity become tools of policy. When Richard Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, the transformation was complete. The dollar became fully fiat, backed not by metal, but by policy. These three federal government actions were controversial, directly contradicted the constitutional limits on federal power, and were taken in a secretive, devious, and conspiratorial manner. The core question and debate over sound money is often framed as gold versus fiat currency. That's too narrow. The real question is, should money act as a restraint on federal power or as a tool that enables it? When you see federal land policy, conservation easements, or shifting local tax burden, you are not just looking at environmental or fiscal policy. You are looking at the downstream effects of monetary design. Money is not neutral. It never has been. In the United States, every major shift away from sound money has come with one consistent outcome: more federal financial power, more influence over and limitation of private property rights, and a shift in who ultimately pays the bill. And that's my open. So tonight, I have a special guest, and that special guest is J.P. Cortez. And let me tell you a little bit about J.P. Cortez. J.P. Cortez is the executive director of Sound Money Defense League, a nationally renowned policy group known for its fervent commitment to advocating for a stable and constitutional monetary system since 2014. JP is a graduate of Auburn University. His strategic initiatives promote sound money in an era of volatile currencies. His work encompasses grassroots advocacy, educational campaigns, and collaborative endeavors with like-minded organizations, all aimed at fostering a broader understanding of the vital link between sound money and individual liberty. His articles and analysis have appeared in Reuters, Business Insiders, Huffington Post, Newsweek, Washington Examiner, among other publications. And he is also the lead author of the Sound Money Index, an annual report that ranks all 50 states to determine which states offer the most pro sound money environment. So, JP, welcome as a guest on Freedom Forum Live.
Dr. Dan, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, JP. So, let's start with something both simple and basic. What is sound money?
When we say sound money, what we're talking about is a money that is stable in its value and retains its purchasing power long term. So that means that are supported by law, for example, legal tender laws and various other government institutions that uphold the money, then that is not sound money. On the other hand, if it's a market money and it's tested by the market, but its value fluctuates wildly, that is also not sound money. So when we say sound money, we're talking about a money whose value has been tested by the market. And with that constant market pressure has retained its value. Gold and silver fit the bill here. The drafters of the Constitution, like you said in your introduction, which was a fantastic introduction, the founders knew of the evils of paper money, which is the equal but opposite, certainly not equal, the opposite of sound money. So when you juxtapose the two, you can see that sound money is money tested by markets. It's money that retains its value. Fiat money or paper money, which is what we have today and what we've had officially since 1971, is money by decree, money by the government. It's a money whose value is determined by the government, whose supply is determined by the government, and those levers are constantly pulled for political purposes. So from the very beginning, we've known sound money is a crucial part of a stable economy, a civilization. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is that sound money allows for planning. When you can make long-term plans, plans like developing infrastructure, building homes, schools, hospitals, when you're able to count on a reliable, stable money, then you can make plans that extend 10, 20, 30 years. When you can't rely on the value of your money and you don't know what the value of your money will be worth a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, then that makes it very difficult for entrepreneurs and enterprising individuals to coordinate. And that human coordination and that capital accumulation is how societies develop. It is a necessary part. It cannot happen without that process. So that process is incredibly important. And that's the first reason why sound money is crucial, because it allows people, societies to plan. The second is, in my opinion, equally as important, and that's that it acts as a bulwark, as a protectant against a government that would otherwise act in ways that seek to empower itself. So a government that is restrained by its capacity to create money is a government that needs necessarily then to be grounded in something like gold and silver, a tangible asset with a real limit. That's what prevents things like endless war. That's what prevents things like bloated bureaucracies and government programs, that entitlement systems that essentially amount to Ponzi schemes today. All of this is enabled, it is incentivized by a false monetary printing system. The money is the chief counterfeit. And from that faking of money, removing the tie that gold once pegged money with, and by removing any sort of real restraint or real tie to the real world, the government has been able to endlessly print. And we've seen since 1971, now 55 years, we've seen that, supporters of the Austrian School of Economics and other free market dispositions, this experiment in paper money has gone exactly the way they said it would. It's an explosion of debt, an explosion of deficit spending. It's endless wars everywhere from Latin America to the Middle East, and so on. And it's entitlement programs that are bleeding a country that is already bankrupt dry. These problems, this pestilence that plagues America today is enabled by and made possible by this monetary system that we have today. And that's why it's so important to restore the link that was once there to gold and silver, to something tangible, to sound money.
JP, you've made a great explanation, and I appreciate that very much. From a historical point of view, it's kind of interesting to think about money. Somewhere along the way, someone said we have to pay for things, or we have to have some means of deciding, is my service, how much is my service worth to you? I'm sure way back, way back, when there was no money, and I don't even know if there was ever a time when there was no money, but two people probably get together and said, if you help watch my sheep, I will give you a wool coat or so. I don't know how it worked, but do you have any knowledge of the history of money? It must be a fascinating thing to think about for me.
It is one of my favorite topics. I also am fascinated by the origins of money. And fortunately, there has been a ton of scholarship on this exact question. Karl Menger, who is the ideological father of the Austrian School of Economics, wrote in his great book on the origins of money. And he wrote, a tale that explained that societies, groups of people moved from direct barter, which is like you were saying, I am a farmer that has eggs, and there's a cobbler who fixes shoes. And so we exchange our services in this way. But if you extend that out, you can see very obvious shortcomings in a system like this. How many eggs is worth the fixing of a pair of boots? What size eggs do they have to be? If we wanted to do business with a butcher, what size cow? What is the ratio of one medium large cow to one pair or three pairs of durable work boots, right? And so these sort of questions, you can see how direct barter has obvious limitations. And so what happened is society eventually found the most saleable good. What they were looking for is the farmer realized, well, wait, I don't have what the cobbler wants, but because I'm a farmer, but I know that the cobbler wants steak, he wants meat, and I know that the butcher has that. So while I don't have any direct use for meat, I know that it is acceptable in payment by others. And this is the process that took place. People started holding goods, not because they directly needed them, but because they realized that they were acceptable in commerce and in exchange. Eventually, the society found the most saleable good was precious metals. And this is among the most fascinating parts of it to me, that, the history of humanity is many thousands of years old, and the earth is so spanning and wide. But despite differences in culture and religion and language and political disposition, almost all societies, absent communication, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, before groups or sects or parts of the population could communicate, they somehow all or many of them landed on gold and silver as money. This wasn't a centrally planned thing. It wasn't a government that waved a wand and said, gold is money now. It was individuals realizing that gold and silver have monetary properties that are ideal in a money that has fungible pieces, a money that whose value can't be printed or inflated away because it actually is a tangible asset and you have to mine it out of the ground. It's a money with unbelievably unique electronic uh, industrial uses. You know, you use it in everything from dental work to your cell phones to modern electronics. Um, Silver is the same, you know, for its industrial uses, the electrification of the world that we're seeing right now with electric vehicles and uh, all of these other, you know, various ways that we're seeing electricity become or supplant coal as a means of power. All of that is only possible because of rare earth minerals like gold and silver. So, for myriad monetary reasons and industrial reasons, gold and silver have always been revered. And in many parts of the world, still are. You know, in America, here in the West, we kind of have lost any tie or understanding of gold and silver. You know, we don't respect it, we don't revere it, we don't use it as money, certainly. Um, but across the world, if you go to Eastern cultures, if you go out to Asia, you can see that it's still very much an important part of their society. Not only is it an important monetary instrument, it's important in jewelry, it's important religiously, it's important ceremonially. So there's a different understanding, and you know, as it pertains to the United States and politics today, we're seeing that since the 70s, where the United States came off of the gold standard entirely and lulled itself to sleep for decades in an era of debt and deficit printing, while at the same time, you know, China, Russia, uh, Turkey, all of these countries have been stockpiling real world assets, you know, not paper debt, not what the United States is doing here with zeros and ones, but actual, tangible, real world assets. And we're seeing that geopolitical dynamic play out today where, you know, gold or it's being stockpiled across the world in rates that haven't been seen in decades, while the United States can't even confirm that the gold that we supposedly owned is actually there in Fort Knox. So it's you know, very disparate, I should say, um, tales between these different sides of the world that have a different understanding of gold and silver and of why they're valuable.
You know, it's really what you've told is an interesting story because obviously other things have been used or attempted to be used as like clams
Oh,
or it's
clamshells,
clams
salt,
from,
wampum, tobacco, everything under the sun has been tried to be used as money.
and the interesting thing is that gold is really is a solid, valuable thing, uh, and that's why it is a standard. One of the interesting facts that I always thought that was important in this whole discussion was back in 1913, an ounce of gold could buy you a very well crafted men's suit.
Mhm.
And here, 100 years later, an ounce of gold can also buy you a very well crafted men's suit. It's kind of like the value of the gold has the same purchasing power, but without the backing of gold, those paper dollars can have any value. And like you said, how can you plan for your future if you have paper currency without backing?
And there's a tragic tale within what you just said, like, and that because this is the reality for millions of Americans who are being stolen from under this system without even realizing it or understanding it. So many people work for decades of their lives planning and being responsible and saving some money and putting money away for retirement, and then the time finally comes where those people can say, finally, I can rest assured that myself and my family are taken care of. I've been diligent, I've been responsible. And then, with nothing but keystrokes, a bureaucrat in an office in a Federal Reserve building can simply create millions or billions of dollars out of thin air. And suddenly, this this life savings that millions of Americans have spent their lives trying to accumulate is diluted. These are principles it's an elementary understanding of principles of dilution. If I put water into wine, the wine is less potent. So it is such when you print money endlessly and you insert it into an economy, you're diluting the purchasing power of all of the existing money. And like I said, so many people are spending their lives in search of the dollar and trying to make it and trying to be rich or to be stable or whatever. And there's a hole in the boat. And maybe most horribly, that hole was put there intentionally. If you go to the Federal Reserve's website right now, their mission statement says that they intend to devalue your money by 2% every single year. That's their purpose. That's what they're doing on purpose. And if you do the math out on that, what that means is that like every 40 years, so over the course of so if the average age is about 80 years for the average American, this is happening twice within your lifetime, that the purchasing power of your money is cut in half. And that has massive implications for your ability to do things like long-term planning, buy a house, retire. But even on a day-to-day basis, this brings into risk the ability for so many to do very basic things like afford housing and transportation and food. And all of that, this economic environment that we live in today isn't an act of God. This didn't happen on accident. It wasn't a perfect storm. This was the result of intentional policy. And so that's why it's so important, because the founders knew this. George Washington called paper money wicked. Madison said it was making a lottery out of all private property. Other founders wrote about how it is among the greatest of evils because it is an instrument with which a government can steal from its people in a way that not 1 in 100 can identify. And that's what makes it so pernicious and so diabolical, frankly. And that kind of speaks to the impetus, creating urgency for solutions. And fortunately, the solution is already there. It was in the Constitution the whole time. It's just a question of going back to these systems that restrain a government that would otherwise never choose to be restrained.
In other words, what you're talking about is the enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8, in which Congress is given they have the control to coin money and determine the value thereof. That's in the Constitution. And obviously, when the Federal Reserve is doing that without any direct control whatsoever, they are being allowed to do this on purpose. Now, we know what the reason for that is, and we can get into that discussion. But one of the things you said, which I thought was interesting, is that when they print a dollar, they're diluting the money. And I think that's a concept. When someone told me this, I said, I was painted a picture in my mind, is every time when the Federal Reserve prints a $20 bill, okay, nothing happens to me until they put it in circulation. The minute they put it in circulation, they have diluted the value of my $20 bill that's sitting in my wallet.
Mm-hmm.
That was a concept that when I realized that, it became like a ton of bricks landing on me saying, that is why this is so perniciously evil, what they are doing. They are stealing directly from each of us, and they don't really care about it because they're doing it on purpose.
Exactly right. And Dr. Dan, and percent every year. So what that means is, just by simply holding it, by saving, you are taking a loss, which let's examine that for just a second. The Federal Reserve and Congress, to be sure. It's a failing on multiple levels. The Federal Reserve has made it so that you cannot do the one thing that you're supposed to do with your money: save it. It has completely destroyed the dollar as a means of saving. The one thing you know now, because it's a suicidal financial strategy to just save cash. It's unwise. You know you're taking a penalty for the benefit of having cash, um, and so they have monetized or savingsized everything else as an asset, and you're seeing that across America. You know, so many people talk about homes as their value. You're looking at investment accounts, 401ks, IRAs. Everything other than the actual money is what we're forced to save in today. And so that speaks to a massive failing in the role that that money is supposed to be playing. So on an individual level, I would say that understanding the process of inflation and how you could even potentially leverage debt in an inflationary environment. So to think about money, more strategically. But fortunately, there is another institution there that can act, and that's the states themselves. We know that the federal money mismanagement that we're living and seeing today is largely the result of Federal Reserve and and policies at the federal level. But that doesn't mean that states have to stand by idly while the purchasing power of their citizens' money withers away because of policy that they didn't even enact. So, and that's what the Sound Money Defense League does. We're going state to state and to Washington, D.C. to remove all of the impediments that are keeping people from using gold and silver as money if they wanted to. Today, unsurprisingly, you may not be surprised to hear that there that no one on earth, no one in America woke up this morning and said, I am going to affirmatively choose the dollar. I'm going to weigh all of my monetary options and I'm going to decide that the dollar is the best for me. The reality is that you're trapped. You don't really have another choice. There's nothing else you can do. And that is an environment that was created by onerous regulation and taxation and all of these impediments to using gold and silver as money. It's one of the few remaining lifeboats that are accessible for average people. And the government has shackled it with taxes and disincentives to using it. The Federal Reserve, or the IRS, excuse me, has said that gold and silver are collectibles. To the IRS, the gold and silver in your vault is no different than a Beanie Baby or a baseball card, which is asinine. Historically, monetarily, culturally, economically, it makes no sense. But unless you're looking at it from the perspective of the government, which is that they want you to use the Federal Reserve note. They want to keep you in the US dollar system because, among other things, among its capacity to fund wars and atrocities all over the world, it also acts as a massive instrument of surveillance. So much of America's surveillance system is it hinges on the reality that you will always need intermediaries to transact. So banks or credit cards. And so the government has been able to say, okay, I won't come for you individually. What I'm going to do instead is come to your credit card company and get them to code certain purchases. Like I'm sure, Dr. Dan, you know and have heard, gun purchases are reported through codes to the government. Or, for example, going to banks, which have Bank Secrecy Act, which was unconstitutional, but that now requires a massive onboarding process where you have to fill out know your customer forms, you have to do anti-money laundering law regulation, and the staying and the the regulation, the compliance with this regulation. And so all of that has created a massive web of surveillance that the government can and regularly does use to violate Americans' Fourth Amendment, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendment, and 10th Amendment rights, at least. Um, and so this system of surveillance, which is ultimately what it has become, and so, for example, another example that you can see the power of a centralized money was, for example, the Canadian truckers during the COVID, the marches, the things that they were doing there, where they were supporting these efforts, and there were people who had their bank accounts frozen for donating to a GoFundMe, or for these truckers who are having their accounts frozen. No, sorry, you can't buy fuel, you can't buy food. Go home, disperse immediately. Which a central power that has that much authority will certainly exercise it, and you can see how maybe even if you're not a lover of liberty, even if you are not completely rabid in your pursuit for freedom, even if you're not, a Rothbardian libertarian anarchist, you can see this and say, wait a second, that's ripe for capture. You're telling me if I ever fall on the wrong side of the government, they can simply cut off my oxygen and my connection to the world. I literally can't exist without money. And the government, if you commit wrongthink, if you donate to a cause that's unfavored, if you express an opinion that the government doesn't like, you're telling me that they have the power to completely cut you off from any sort of financial system? That strikes fear, absolute terror in the heart of anyone that is liberty minded in any way. So it's a great power, and it's arguably the greatest power in history. From the beginning of time, governments, individuals, people have been seeking a way to make, gold out of coal. The power to control the money is the power to control everything. And so it's such a great and awesome power, and governments have monopolized it and abused it at every turn. And that's why it's so important to restore the wall that existed before, to make sure, because these people have shown time and time again they are willing to abuse this power, and they certainly will, at the expense of Americans and their literal tax dollars. But also, in the process of doing all that, Americans are less safe. Americans have their constitutional rights trampled. Americans are now enemies in the eyes of many foreigners. And that's not the result of actions by American people, certainly, but rather by the government that is ostensibly representing them.
This brings up, obviously, the next thing to talk about is the ultimate capture of our freedom would be a digital currency system. Mm-hmm. That would be really the death of freedom in this country.
Yes.
Would it not?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that anyone, that's sort of attuned to these issues, that has to be enemy potentially number one right now. This move towards completely digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, programmable money. My colleague and great friend, she's a genius, Catherine Austin Fitz, talks about, and has for a long time with her work at the Solari Report, about the dangers of programmable money and how this is an instrument of control. And you can see that for a long time, state and the federal government have been waging a war against cash, have been waging a war against anonymous or pseudo-anonymous payment methods. Everything is to be digital. Everything is to be noted down on the ledger. Every single transaction. If you move a penny, the government wants to know about it. And that is so certainly backwards from the ideals that this country was founded on. The Federal Reserve today, obviously, and many of the arms of the banking surveillance system are unconstitutional. But that has mattered for a long time. The Constitution has been trampled, not just here, but in many instances.
Well, this is really a key here for me. we have a whole generation or two of young people who live on their cell phones. Every single thing they do is digital.
Hmm.
And for them to be captured into this idea of digital currency would be kind of automatic in my mind.
Yeah.
They don't have, they have zero idea how dangerous this is for their freedom. I think in many ways, most of them don't even understand. They don't understand freedom. They don't understand. They certainly don't understand the Constitution. They don't even know it exists. Most of them. But the point is, for them, they don't understand the true risk of living on that cell phone when it comes to their finance.
Hmm.
So I guess
And
it comes to the up to the Sound Money Defense League, right? And I'd be
yeah,
happy to help them out. I hope this broadcast will help them out. We can take pieces of it and help them out. But this is something they have to learn. Hopefully, not the hard way. That
yeah.
you that if you give up your freedom to financially interact with another person, you are no longer free at
Mhm.
all.
Mhm. And so much of it, especially for the generation that you're talking about, my generation and younger, it's automatic because it's already the case. Many of us are already, when we go to the store, we tap with our phones. Many of us don't carry uh, cash frequently. So yeah, it would be very simple to slip into the digital system, and in large part because we already kind of live under one. Like I said earlier, the money that we use today is a tool for surveillance and has been for a long time now. So there are differences, very important differences between what the money that we have today and a central bank digital currency where every individual has a master account at the Federal Reserve. But in many ways, they're also already similar. And this breach of uh, privacy, financial privacy rights has already taken place. But the issue on top of, obviously, like we mentioned, the surveillance aspect of this is a huge risk for the privacy of all Americans. But again, to the economics of it, everyone having a master account at the Fed would give them the power to enact monetary policy in a way that they currently don't have. So, for example, a negative savings rate today, the American economy, the global economy, is largely one that functions on the velocity of money. Money has to be spent. It has to keep going because it's a massive machine that has been built on consumerism and spending. So the spending has to happen and the turnover has to happen. Um, but if it didn't, if we then stopped incentivizing a system that required so much turnover, um, and instead the government says, you know what, or rather, let's if the government said we need to enact policies to make sure that this turnover can continue. So what we're going to do now is enact a 10% tax on all savings accounts. If your account is directly with the Fed, they can enact monetary policy in a way that it would be them putting their finger on the scale and motivating your behavior with things like negative savings rates. And that would be a massive instrument to force the actions of individuals. So in a very real way, not just in the obvious surveillance way that we all know of. You donate to a cause, or you support this or that, and yeah, if the government, or you buy a gun, or various other things like this, the government sees that, they see the line item on your transaction sheet, and they say, okay, that's bad, we need to stop that. But in a monetary policy way, it's also giving them a ton of power too. And all of this central bank, you can see it, you're already seeing it play out in other countries around the world. But it is the opposite of the American ideal of your Fourth Amendment right to the privacy of your paper and your properties, um, and all of this is a tool for control. It's central planners that technocrats that seek to control, and the use of the money is maybe primarily one of the ways historically that it's most been done. It's like we said, it's the power to control the money gives you ultimate power over a society.
It really is true, and that's obviously what we're all afraid of. If once we understand what is going on, then anyone who understands what's going on, we really would be afraid. Uh, because a lot of this is out of our individual control.
Mm.
I know it'd be great to think, well, yeah, we can do something, but we really can't. As individuals, it's really tough. Yes, I can go off money. Okay. I can use gold, silver, whatever item of
Mhm.
value that someone else will accept
Mhm.
as payment for something that I need. Barter, we can go back to barter.
Mhm.
That obviously is something that the government cannot touch. They are petrified of that. They're very petrified of that because they understand they cannot touch barter. And there's not enough of them to watch me every single second of every day to see me slip whatever to a friend of mine for so he'll fix something of mine
Mhm.
and I will help him out with something that I can help him out with. They can't police that. And so that's what they're afraid of that. And that's why they are throwing all these roadblocks, like you mentioned. And so let's say you do uh, collect or purchase gold and silver as a hedge against what's going on. At what point would you ever convert one piece of or silver to a worthless dollar bill? It wouldn't make sense, would it?
And everyone's financial situation is different, but yeah, I mean, if you look at just the basics of the trade you're describing there, you're wanting to exchange an appreciating asset that's scarce and fungible and inflation proof, and you want to exchange that for a depreciating paper printed at will.
Who would
It
do that?
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't, the math isn't math in there.
So if you do uh, purchase gold, your object in mind has to be that at some point you can use that as direct.
Or the hope is, what we're doing with the Sound Money Defense League, that by removing various state and federal, that maybe people will be incentivized to spend gold or silver as money. There's no reason to do that today. It, in my opinion, um, to try to spend gold. In many states, every time you spend your gold, you're a state capital gains tax and then a federal capital gains tax. So unless you're willingly wanting to pay 30% more for any given good, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to spend your gold and silver today as money like that. But in a world where we're able to remove the capital gains tax and the sales tax on gold and silver, we might find that if nothing else, this forces America's money managers to be better stewards of taxpayer money. It's a pipe
It,
dream. I know it's a hope.
it ain't going to happen. Well, let's face it. I mean, these are not benevolent people. These are evil people. If to do what they're doing and to understand what they're doing is pure evil. They are harming millions of people on purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's theft, and it's not just theft, but it goes to enable the worst things that humans do. Um,
So let's talk about the Sound Money Defense League. And their website, by the way, is soundmoneydefense.org. Need to visit because it has great articles on it. Maybe this video will end up on it. But the point I'm making is that there are some organizations that have recognized and want to help enable people like me and you and people who listen to you to actually do something about it. And that really is what we need to happen. We need a groundswell of public opinion to fight back against I'll call it theft because people understand that word, but obviously it's more than theft. It is evil theft. That's what's going on. And we need champions to go out and say, this has got to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the things, for background, I studied at the Mises Institute, which is an Austrian economics think tank located in Auburn, Alabama. I came up in, a very deep and storied history of the great Austrian economists and Austro-libertarian thinkers, Ron Paul, Joe Napolitano, Menger, Hayek, Rothbard, all of these giants of this intellectual school. And so coming into this work, I already had a pretty low opinion of government. I would have described myself as skeptical, maybe at best. But what I found I've been doing this now 11 years, and you said something earlier, Dr. Dan, which was accurate. It was right. You don't really have a lot of power, certainly at the federal level. If you want to reach out to your congressperson, you can try. You might get a form response back. You might get a response back from an aide, but your letter, your email will be filed away. Maybe read once by an intern and then never to be read again. And that is the sad reality of political efficacy at the federal level in American electoral politics. But that's not the case at the state level. And at the state level, individuals do have power, outsized, a large amount of power. And so, to any of your listeners, if you take away anything from this interview, it should be that you do have a powerful voice at the state level, not in Washington, D.C., but in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Salem, Oregon. You as an individual in the state, reaching out to your state legislators and telling them, yes, I support this, or no, I don't support this, really makes a difference at the state level, because they're not used to organize grassroots pressure. And all it takes is a dozen emails from people across the state to make that state legislator say, oh, wow, something's going on. I need to pay attention to this issue. So I encourage everyone, I appreciate the plug to the website. On the website, you'll find a sign up link on the front page where you can put in your zip code and your email address. And the reason we ask for your zip code is because these state legislative battles happen, and they only pertain to certain states. So then you're not going to hear about a battle happening in Nebraska. But if you are in Louisiana or in any given state where there's one of these battles, we will be sending out action alerts. We make it very easy to participate. We'll send their names, their email addresses, their phone numbers. More than, me putting a suit on and going to testify at these committee hearings. More than any of that, the most powerful thing that legislatively, policy-wise, we have is grassroots. It's individuals in the state who care And so I strongly encourage everyone, and I get it. I get being frustrated with politics. I get feeling powerless. Listening to realize that you're not powerless at the state level. And if you're willing to act, you can make a difference.
They really are. And I'm happy to hear that the Sound Money Defense League is willing to take a stand and help have that index state by state. It was interesting to read that. North Carolina, where we are, is kind of at the top.
We're working on that.
We're working on that. That sounds like a good thing to do. Any other? I would appreciate something up for us.
Sure. Yeah. Just so on the index, if you want to see where your state ranks, I encourage you to check that out, the Sound Money Index. We also put out something called the Sound Money Review. We pulled out our edition last year in 2025, late 2025, and we do an internship. So the Sound Money Review was a collection of our fellowship, not an internship, it's a fellowship. And our wrote a very thought-provoking long-form piece that we were able to include, and also we were greats. Dr. Edwin Vieira, who is a constitutional lawyer, who is a genius. He wrote the Bible. They're textbooks called Pieces of Eight. He's a constitutional genius. Hans Senholz, who is an economist who was great on free market issues. So it's getting able to republish and exist out in the world, and maybe at one point they were read, but they kind of get swept away. And so this is an opportunity for us to restore some of these, to draw new light and new attention on these ideas that are more relevant. We do the index and the review. We also offer scholarships, like I mentioned, fellowships as well. So you can find. But I think, yeah, so I'll leave you not just with the idea, excuse me, not just with the idea voice at the state level, but also with an understanding that you are owed, as an American, this idea of stable, inflation-proof money. That's something that you're owed as an American. That is your constitutional birthright, to live in a society where things are stable, where you don't have to gamble away in the risky stock market casino just to try to make a down payment on a house. You can think about retiring. Um, you know, it's this monetary system that enables all of the really horrible things that America's government regularly participates in. So I would encourage everyone to fight for these things, because the reality is, like, on an individual level, on a day-to-day level, inflation is a little hard to see. But when you start thinking generationally, when you start thinking about your children and the children of your children, what you start seeing is that, I'm not having a nerdy esoteric debate about supply and demand charts, or dot plots, or regressions. What I'm talking about is a world for my progeny with fewer wars and more opportunity and more social collaboration between people. And that speaks to the importance. It underscores the importance that money be honest and be stable and be honest weights and measures. This is a biblical concept that has existed for thousands of years. It's arguably, second to the spoken word. It's arguably the most withholding support or giving support. The way you spend your money is a reflection of who you are and what you believe in. And that money be a clear communication signal, not distorted and perverted by a government who's weaponizing the money for its own purposes.
J.P. Cortez, thank you very, very much. That was an incredible closing statement. I'm not going to say a thing, but thanks. Thank you for being a fantastic guest on Freedom Forum Live. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Dan. I'll see you again soon.
Yes, you will.